was elected, I was talking to another legislator and I said, you know, I think that I need to kind of find something that I can get my arms around and kind of make it mine, something that I could come back and work on year after year. You know, for some legislators it was, you know, DWI, DUI issues. For other legislators it was various other things. And I was at a meeting and they were having a discussion back east about transparency and open government. And I realized very quickly then that that's something I wanted to take on. And I just want to read you a real quick quote. This is a quote by President Thomas Jefferson. He said, "We might hope to see the finances of the Union as clear and as intelligible as a merchant's books, so that every member of Congress and every man of any mind in the Union shall be able to comprehend them, to investigate abuses, and to consequently control them." You know, that was over 200 years ago, and you know, the framers and founders of our nation, that was one of the general premises, one of the building blocks that they wanted for our nation, was open and transparent government. And at the time, that was just a totally radical notion, that the fact that the books would be open to the public. But then it was well-intentioned, but it wasn't easy. I mean, the books were open, but if you didn't live in Philadelphia or Washington, D.C., you'd have to get on a horse or a wagon and ride for days, weeks, or months. So a noble idea, but there were some logistical issues as far as the populace being able to actually get involved. So you fast forward to the 19th century. You know, government had grown exponentially, but there was inadequate technology still to deliver that information to the public. Fast forward to the 20th century. That's this past century we all grew up and lived in, and you understand, of course, how government has grown exponentially and how it's become so convoluted and complex. I think very few people really truly understand the matrix of government, let alone where to go to get information, to get what you want, to engage in the process and learn about your government. So you fast forward to the 21st century. Since 2006, when the federal government enacted the Federal Funding, Accountability, and Transparency Act, 31 states have created their own transparency websites, either through legislative action or executive order. And in 2009, fast forward again a little bit, I introduced Senate Bill 159, which would require the state to develop, operate, and maintain a publicly accessible internet database that contains extensive information on state budgets, expenditures, and other financial records. So what was going to be on that thing? We were going to have the state's checkbook ledger, monthly summary of state investment accounts, annual operating budgets for each state agency. It would list the revenue that the state received and from what sources, special appropriations received outside the General Appropriations Act, reversions and cash balances. It went on and on and on. This was in 2009. Sounds like a great idea, right? This thing flew through the Senate, got through 2 committees, passed the Senate unanimously, got to the first committee in the House, and it was killed. When I went in and presented that bill, I was talking about it and why it was a good thing to do, and everybody was nodding their head. There were about 9 or 10 committee members there. And then a certain unnamed leader of that chamber came in, whispers were exchanged, and that bill was killed. That's as far as it went. That was the end of it. So I was crushed. That was the first bill I had killed. I was ready to go in the hall and fight everybody. I was really, really, really upset. And then I began to understand what was going on, the processes and some of the issues. The media began to get involved in that issue. They began to write about it. And they began to get involved. And folks like Sarah Welsh with New Mexico Foundation of Open Government, Steve Allen with Common Cause, Paul Gessing with the Rio Grande Foundation began to make a lot of noise about this. And when I would get called by the media and say, well, why didn't this thing pass? I'd say, well, you need to call XYZ in the House and you need to ask them why it didn't pass. They killed it. And they did call them. And they put a lot of pressure on them. So then I ran this bill again in 2010, Senate Bill 195. Pretty much the same bill. We tweaked it a little bit. That bill passed the Senate unanimously. It passed the House with only 1 dissenting vote because they got the message. And I dared them to push back on that, and they couldn't. So we did get it through. And with some help from the Lieutenant Governor at that time, we worked together and got that done. So the legislation required the Sunshine Portal to be up and running by July 1st of 2011. The Department of Information Technology worked really hard. They got a good vendor in there. They actually got this thing up and running in December of this last year. So we had what's called a soft rollout. Now everything that's intended to be in there isn't in there yet. But the architecture, the framework is there. You can go to www.sunshineportalnm.com and you can get in there and you can kind of see how this thing is going to work. See what the tabs are, how you can drill down and get the information that you want. It is a soft rollout. This thing will be fully operational and all the data that's intended to be in it will be in it July 1st, 2011. So when you go in there, understand that. This is just a way of getting it out there because we want people to give us feedback. If you go to that website, you'll notice on the homepage there's a place there where you can type in your comments, criticisms, and suggestions. That's the whole purpose of this thing for the next 6 months, or the remainder till July 1st. July 1st. We want you guys to go in there and say, hey, this is great, but you screwed this up. You don't have this, or you don't have that, or you got this information, but I can't sort it the way I want. That's what we need to know. So by the time July 1st rolls around, this thing will be ready to go. So we got that thing passed. Everything's great. But we had an oops moment. Half of the state budget was not yet in the Sunshine Portal. It was not planned to be in it. And that's public education. The reality is K-12, public education is almost 50% of the state budget. That wasn't in there yet. So this last session that we just finished, I ran Senate Bill 327, and that will require the public schools to put their information into the state budget. We're talking about their annual operating budgets, salary schedules and policies, monthly expenditures by category, monthly revenue by source, and an inventory of all of their real property. So by July 1st, public education needs to begin to get this information available. We gave them until October 2012 to get all of this information to a point where it can flow into the portal. We understand some of the logistical challenges for them, so we gave them a little bit of time. None of this was easy, as Sarah can tell you. You know, she's been fighting these transparency issues for years, going to government agencies, trying to get information, having to file the Freedom of Information Act requests, running into a stone wall. Some of the information was hard to get, but then there were some people by design that were making it very difficult for them to get what they wanted to get. When I first ran this bill a couple years ago, we were going to go back. This was great. The first bill was going to go back 10 years and capture all this information. All of us new guys in the legislature thought this is great. A bunch of the old guys almost had heart attacks. That was the last thing they wanted, was to somebody go back for 10 years and start putting in contracts, salaries, names. They were beside themselves. So I very quickly said, okay, look, the reality is when you legislate, you have to make compromise. I said, we won't go back. We'll start with fiscal year 2011 and go forward. So you could hear this collective sigh of relief. And that's one reason we were able to get it done. I'll tell you another thing, too. This is really a nonpartisan issue. Some of the old guard that hated this and still hate it because they have a lot to fear from it, they like things just the way they are. The last thing they want is somebody shining a light on these things. It's nonpartisan. There were Republicans that were as scared and afraid of this thing as there were Democrats. Totally nonpartisan. When this thing got passed, there were, like I said, unanimously through the Senate, and one opposing vote in the House. It's a nonpartisan issue, and that's a great thing about this bill. When I talk to people or I present these ideas in the legislature, it doesn't line up on a partisan line. It adds up with who has something to fear from it and or who really sees this as the right thing to do for open government. And if you go back to the federal legislation in 2006 that was passed, there were about 5 or 6 senators that co-sponsored that bill. 2 of the guys that worked on that thing really hard and co-sponsored that was Senator John McCain and then Senator Barack Obama. So it is a nonpartisan issue. And so that's one way we presented this to our fellow legislators. But the reality is, you know, we started out with this idea of open and transparent government, comparing it to the merchant's books in a shop over 200 years ago. With the advent of the technology, with websites and web technology and all that, we're finally to a point now, finally, where I think for the first time in our nation's history, other than maybe the first few weeks when we started to form the government and everything was on a couple of sheets of paper, we're finally now to the point where Jefferson's dream, I think, can be realized because of the advances in technology. We have a long way to go. All of these things that the states have done, and the federal government has just been within the last 5, 6 years. But it's going to take your involvement. You guys need to give, create input. You need to keep the pressure on. you know, Sarah Welsh and her folks, all those people, they plowed the ground for this. This is why this got done when it did. They've been working on this for years. But this is just the right thing to do. And it's not perfect. We have a ways to go yet. And I keep making the point to people that the creation of this site is not a static event or a static process. It's going to evolve. It's going to get better as we get input, as technology improves, and as the software creates a situation where this data can flow in real time back and forth through the portal. But we need your input, and I hope that you will get involved in that process. And at the end of the day, this portal and these kinds of things are intended to give you all information that you need to engage in the process, to engage your legislators, call us up, hold our feet to the fire, and raise Cain with us. I can't wait to start getting some of those calls. Senator Rue, you stupid SOB, what in the world were you guys thinking when you did this, this, and this? Or were you aware of that, that, and that? We're going to have thousands of eyes looking at this stuff. And I see that as a real benefit to me because I can't catch it all. And I encourage and look for people to be calling me up and pointing some of these things out to me. And this is how we'll improve the process. This is how we'll make things better. So I'm going to shut up. I want to hear what you all have to say.